So a big question I've been getting is, what is the new meta? Is Dematerializer still the best? Is Light still the same loadout? Should I still be using Winch? Let's get into the balance changes that happen with Season 8. And then I'm going to discuss each class, and I'm going to let you guys know what might see more use and what's going to be taking a bit of a backseat, along with how the meta might shift. At least from the early competitive scrims that I've seen so far, I feel like I have a pretty good idea of where it might be headed. Now, this is not a loadout video. I'll be making a meta loadout video once everything has sort of settled. But Season 8 changes have a lot of indirect buffs and nerfs that I want to bring to light here. So take this video as something to consider when building your new loadout for this season. So let's go over some of the balance changes. So we have 2 new weapons, the BFR Titan for heavy and the P90 SMG for medium. We've also got smooth destruction. As you can see here, a lot of things that are going to be falling into buildings are going to destroy a little bit more predictably, which I think is going to open up a lot more strategy in the meta. But I think it's going to take a while for people to really start to properly utilize this. Before, we had an idea of how things would break, but now we need to kind of adapt, and there could be some pretty intense strategies with dropping either suspended structures, cranes, the wrecking ball. We might see some very unique plays happen. Suspended structures like a Monaco are updated, and I think this is going to open up some more viability when it comes to range gameplay, but it's also going to allow people to push these range situations a little bit better. I think overall we're going to see a little bit less frustration around suspended structures, but it might open up a completely new playstyle, and we'll get into that in a bit. Kyoto has also had some upgrades to allow it to have a bit of a better traversal, especially around the bottom water part of the map and the basements. Now, first thing on the balance list, we have here the frag grenade now has an in-world indicator. This is essentially a slight nerf, so I could see frag grenade still being a pretty irrelevant pick in the meta. Now, the H+ infuser did get a nerf, but I think this is so insignificant that we're still going to see H+ infuser as a meta pick for the class. Thermal vision is temporarily disabled, which is definitely going to be shaking up some of the viable picks and strategies that we've seen. Next is the Dematerializer, which got a pretty significant nerf from 3 to 2 charges, along with adding some new effects and functionalization around this spec. Guardian Turret and Healing Beam both got buffs. Guardian Turret, I think, is still going to be a little bit irrelevant, but Healing Beam, I think with these changes, will definitely help it become a lot more viable. Winch Claw actually saw a pretty decent nerf here. Now, I'm not too sure if this really is going to impact the meta too much, but I could definitely see some people shifting over to some of the other specializations, and we'll probably see a little bit less Winch, but I still think Winch would be pretty solid. And the main reason is because of cash out manipulation, and that is a really, really solid reason why you would want to bring Winch Claw to begin with. Now let's get into the weapon balance changes. So Akimbo basically has the fall off damage, min and max range reduced by a little bit. This isn't really going to shake up the meta much. Akimbos are still going to be pretty solid. CBO1, this small buff is actually pretty nice. I don't see this being a meta pick, but I could see it being a lot more viable now. We're going to lump the dual blades and the riot shield a little bit together. I think these are being evened out. There's a little bit of a buff on dual blades and a little bit of a nerf on riot shield. I think that playstyle is still going to have a place for some people, especially if you run compositions that cater to a melee medium. I would still say Riot Shield is probably the better pick over the two. LH1 getting a slight damage buff, I think, is a little bit overlooked, because I think with some of the changes that we're seeing here, and we're seeing a little bit more heal, LH1 is already going to be a little bit more dominant. So this little buff, you're probably going to be seeing a lot more people playing LH1 after this. And I can foresee this seeing another nerf, but we'll definitely have to monitor this and see where it goes. The Pike got a bit of a nerf here, but there was a little bit of a bug where the headshot multiplier is doing 2x, where it doesn't really mention that the headshot is being changed here. So potentially either something that wasn't in the patch notes or is going to be fixed. Maybe even hot fixed by the time you guys are watching the video. Pike was actually so dominant, and I think that this is going to push people away from using Pike, which I think is going to allow a little bit more variety. I could see FAMAS and the F-Car taking over those top 2 spots. But we'll definitely have to see where the meta shifts, because like I said, with people being a little bit more range because of healing and sustain, the Pike could potentially be still viable. Now let's cover each class and where I think some of these loadouts are going to shift, or at least what I think could become more viable or less viable. For light, I see Cloak becoming a little bit more popular. I don't think it will take over the meta. Dash will probably still remain as the best pick, but I really wouldn't be surprised seeing people try to bring Cloak back into the meta, especially when nobody really expects it and we haven't been seeing it for quite some time. Thermal being out of the game is definitely given that opportunity for Cloak to reappear. For weapons on the class, I can foresee close range weapons falling out a little bit more in favor for some longer range options like LH1, ARN 220, and I could still see the 93R being a pretty solid pick. Those are probably my top 3 at the moment as early speculation. And then I can also see stuff like the 2 shotguns becoming a lot more difficult to utilize. And the main reason I have this prediction is because of the dematerializer nerf. This is going to lead to a lot more healing beams, and therefore with team comps having 2 healing players, a light infuser and then a medium healing beam, the sustain and poke will be a lot more viable, and then brawling with close range compositions that would usually utilize the dematerializer to do this is going to suffer because of it. Demat has historically enabled a lot of these close range fighting playstyles, so without it, I can see a little bit of a shift. Now, some sleeper picks that I find Light has is actually going to be the SR84. Sniping could actually be a pretty viable way to play this game with all the sustain and range that we could potentially be seeing. Another weapon is the sword. Since there's no thermal vision, there's not really a counter to smoke, and as a sword player, you don't necessarily need thermal vision to utilize a smoke. You can just swing through the smoke and end up getting some hit markers. But we will talk about smoke counters in a bit. But the fact is, sword doesn't really suffer as much from not having thermal vision. So definitely a strategy if you are into sword. This season, I could definitely see a rise in the popularity of sword until thermal vision returns. And for all my bow enjoyers, I think bow is going to feel a little bit better if your team combos with that really high single fire damage weapons, such as the Pike, LH1, the CB01, revolver, stuff like that. But I would say your solo potential is a little bit worse when facing all these healing gadgets, as your DPS with the bow is quite low. So you're going to want to make sure you're playing off of your team, but it could potentially be a lot stronger if you play into it correctly. Now for gadgets, I see dematerializer replacements such as breaching charge, thermal bore, and even gravity vortex being a little bit more viable since they can open up walls, stall cash outs like DMAT was able to do before. However, the H+ infuser, gateway, and glitch are all still going to be the meta picks as far as I can tell. Another gadget with a bit more potential is the vanishing bomb. Like I mentioned before, the removal of thermal vision is going to give a little bit more space for options like this. Sonar grenade is now going to be the best option to counter smoke. So previously, smoke blocked scanning like sonar, proximity, and even recon senses way back in the day. But that was actually patched sometime during last season, so consider bringing this if you really need to deal with some smoke. Now, a quick story about light and different metas. Actually, during season 7, I was very busy with life, as you guys already know. So for about 2 months, I wasn't even playing the game. And within roughly the last 2 weeks of the season, I had to come back and grind Ruby, which I was successfully able to do. And as you can see here from this graph, near the end, I had a pretty big burst of winning. I ended up in rank 494, barely making it, but I used an extremely easy strat. And the main reason was because I was very often just LFGing, and I wasn't really on a set team like I have been previously. I needed a strategy that worked with minimum skill required, especially since coming back from so long, I wasn't really up to date as I previously was. I've definitely caught up since then, but I just need something simple. The strategy was smoke grenade and thermal vision. Whenever 2 teams fought over a cash out, my team would just simply follow me. I would smoke the cash out, one of them would steal, and I would use thermal vision while they stole, either healing them or just dealing damage to anybody trying to push the point. Anybody pushing point would get shot by the third party, and nobody would be able to see us unless they had thermal vision, which was typically my focus of just killing the other light that had thermal vision. This was one of the most free cash out strats that I've ever experienced in the history of this game, and I won a lot of games that I feel like I didn't deserve to win. And to anyone I faced during these weeks, I apologize for the cheese, but the finals offer so many strategies, and there are things like this that make for such an easy way to win more games that I can foresee smoke steals staying as a viable strategy while thermal vision isn't in the game. So don't be shy to get creative while the meta is being discovered early season. Who knows if there's going to be another easy strategy like this that comes around. Now let's get into medium, which I think this season has got the biggest shakeup with specs. DMAT getting a nerf, healing beam getting buffed, and turret getting buffed. Now I can see more viability across the board. And I'll say now turret is probably still a bad pick, but I think the fight between DMAT and Healing Beam being the meta pick is going to be interesting to see. I predict right now we will be seeing the viability of Healing Beam take over quite a bit. And this especially depends on what you bring as your team comp. Are you going for a more brawl playstyle, or if you're going for a long range sustain comp, you might want to build accordingly. For weapons, the Pike nerf might take it out of the meta, so FAMAS and FCAR might be the main picks here. Shotguns, like I said previously, are going to fall out of the meta a little bit more, especially for those rocking Healing Beam. It might make it hard to use those close range weapons, such as the new weapon, the P90. While it is quite good, this suits a more aggressive brawling playstyle that the Dematerializer enabled. So with this nerf, unfortunately, the P90 is just going to kind of sit as an average pick for the time being, unless you are really good with the Dematerializer and you can fully utilize that close range. It's definitely going to take a lot of skill to make the P90 stand out, especially in ranked mode. I think when it comes to casuals, where it's a lot more aggressive, P90 is probably going to be a pretty solid pick. Now, Riot Shield and Dual Blades, I think, have a place in compositions that prefer a melee medium on their team. But with the sustain that's going to be in the game, such as the Healing Beam and the Healing Infuser, I could see melee on medium suffering just a little bit because their DPS isn't as great as something like the Sledgehammer or the Sword or the Dagger. There's gonna be a lot of times where you're just continuously beating away at someone that's just getting healed, and then eventually you die. The CB01 Repeater and the Revolver could both see play in the way that the Pike used to be played, as that high single fire damage weapon, and combining that with some of the weapons that we're seeing in Season 8 that are also high single fire damage weapons. This could give you some instant picks in fights when firing together with your team, leading to some really good early kills that can just win your fights right then and there. It's almost like the counter to healing when you can kill somebody so fast that they can't even heal through it. Now for gadgets, I don't foresee too much of a shift, but I think Zipline has always combined pretty well with healers because of their capability to support their heavy, so this could be consideration for now. Proximity sensor is also one of the limited counters to smoke, so consider bringing these if you're running into smoke a lot more, but only time will tell if people pick up on that strategy. Now heavy, which is my favorite class to play at the moment, as you can see with the gameplay in the back, I've adapted to a pretty unique loadout. I want to break down that at the end as an example of some of the new meta potential we see from these changes. But with Winch getting a nerf, I believe Mesh and Charge and Slam especially becoming a lot more viable. The reason being for Charge and Slam is that it is great for quickly opening up walls, floors, and disrupting any stealers, meaning it can basically do what the Dematerializer did previously, albeit maybe a little bit less effectively and a little bit more aggressively. But with a Winch getting nerfed as well, I could see a little bit more Mesh in the meta, and Charge and Slam is a great counter to Mesh. It's also a pretty good answer to the Riot Shield popularity that we've seen in recent patches. I think Charge and Slam is a little bit of a slept-on pick, and Season 8 I can see it being a lot more viable. When it comes to Mesh, it's a pretty reliable pick now that the Winch cooldown got nerfed. So consider going back to Mesh if you enjoyed it before. And for Winch, I still think it is probably going to be the meta pick. Don't get me wrong, but you will be punished a little bit more if you're a little bit unfamiliar with it. This isn't going to be a very beginner-friendly spec. This is more for those people that have been using Winch for a while and are a lot more reliable. If you get your skill down with it, Winch is still pretty solid. Casual manipulation is just a really strong tactic in this game. And with the range meta coming back, I could see Winch becoming even more strong simply for that utility of being able to pull a cash out into the open and then just have you and your teammates sit further back with ranged weapons and just beam at anybody trying to steal. Now for heavy weapons, I think some of the top picks will remain the same. We have the SA-12, the Deagles, the Shack, and the minigun, which the SA-12 potentially being less suitable for some new compositions, and definitely something to avoid if you are a solo queue player not experienced with the SA-12. While the shotgun is very strong, it requires a lot of skill and knowledge, more so than pretty much anything else on the class. Now, some of the weapons that I feel are a lot harder to use this season is going to be the Sledgehammer and the Spear. Both weapons used a Winch very often, so because of that Winch nerf, I could see melee users suffering a little bit more. Similar logic to the SA-12 here. The new BFR Titan really suits a lot of team comps that rely on this range and very punchy single-fire weapons like the LH1 and Pike, as an example, combine pretty well with this weapon. So if your team focuses on brawling and close range, the BFR Titan could provide some needed range to round out the comp, but then you fall into the struggle of being a backline heavy, which might be difficult to make use of. I have seen some combinations with the winch where if you land a headshot after winching a light, you could basically one combo them. So there's definitely a playstyle there in close range, but I would say it's a little bit harder to pull off than some of the other weapons. Now, I personally use Charger Slam with it as I feel it just suits me best, and it provides me a better close range option to round out my build. Now for gadgets, I think this really depends on the comp that you want to run. So I would say try Healing Emitter and Barricade if you want to hold some angles from range, but I think Healing Emitter could overall just end up being a bit of an overkill, especially when we're going to see so many healers, and if both your teammates are healing, you might not need the Healing Emitter, but who knows, maybe the combination of all three can make you have some insane sustain. C4 is definitely going to be even more important than it has been previously for playing drop, because with the lack of dematerializer, having C4 is going to be your one source of playing drop, which is very important. Lockbolt will be good on a lot of teams that like to brawl and play aggressively. So if you are running into teams that are kiting and trying to play range, Lockbolt could be that solution for picking off one of those enemies as they're kiting away. With only two demat charges, you're probably going to see kiting not as effective. Now that Season 8 is out, I'm really curious what loadouts and strategies you guys have come up with. As you can see from the gameplay, I'm really loving Charge and Slam, BFR Titan, RPG, Barricade, or C4, and then we have Dome Shield to round it out. This loadout feels like a good answer to the balance changes. Do I think it is the meta-heavy loadout? No. Can I beat top players using it? Well, yeah. I wouldn't shy away from using what I enjoy best. I've used bow in the pro scene to decent success, and I'm not afraid to push off meta strategies into the competitive environment. With a new season comes new strategies. Exploring different ideas and potentially finding a new meta is always a fun time. Consider subscribing if you aren't already. I'll be covering the meta loadouts when they form, but we obviously got to let people cook for a little bit. And I obviously am going to cover some more tips and tricks for the finals. Thank you to all my members and to all the people who came to chat with me over on Twitch TV. Feel free to come see me live if you are interested in chatting there. Feel free to ask any questions. I try to be as educational as I can there while being entertaining. Season 8 is looking like a whole new environment for the meta. So grab your favorite loadout and I will see you in the finals.